With apologies to a lot of people in this room who have heard me before and some who are already on our team, but I see a lot of faces that are new, and so I'm excited to be talking to a group that has a lot of potential here. We are the Election Integrity Project, and the first question is, why do we need one? If you have not heard of this book, get a hold of it, read it. You'll be convinced we need an Election Integrity Project. Stealing Elections by John Fund. He writes for the Wall Street Journal and a lot of other places you'll recognize his name. The second book I would recommend to you is written by J. Christian Adams. He is the law election lawyer who was part of the DOJ and who worked up the case against the new Black Panther intimidation situation that happened. And when that case was ordered dropped, Adams decided he couldn't work for that department anymore because it was not really interested in enforcing the law. So he now runs the Election Law Center, and he is the legal counsel for our organization, the Election Integrity Project. His book was just published less than a month ago, and it's an amazing expose of why we have to do this ourselves, because we're not going to get any help from the Department of Justice, which is supposed to be making sure we have free and fair elections. John Fund says that you have to acknowledge the problem before you can solve it. And so I think most of you in this room would acknowledge that we do have an election process that is not perfect, and that it can at times be haphazard, fraud-prone, etc. And we don't want to look like a developing nation. People, we should be the leading democracy in the world. And if you looked at our election process, you would not think so. He also reminds us that most of us don't trust politicians. And that we all pretty much would be willing to admit that we think that they might be willing to commit fraud if they could get away with it. Okay? We also have a problem of flawed voter rolls. We have voter ignorance. That's a big one. We're part of one of the big things that we do is try to educate voters. If voters know what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it, if we know the process, then we're not going to be misled by the error and the ignorance out there that might make our votes not count. So it's very important that we become educated as voters in the process itself. We have lackadaisical law enforcement and shortage of trained volunteers. That's another place where we're really trying to make a difference. I want all of you in this room to become a trained volunteer in some aspect of the Election Integrity Project. John Fund says that it appears that some of these problems are built into the system by design. Now, you would think that legislators would read what they vote for before they vote for it. You would also think that they would think through the unintended consequences of what they vote for, but it appears that that is not what happens most of the time. And that's why we have a lot of laws that are well-intentioned, but have some very significant unintended consequences that we have to watch out for. The first one is the National Voting Rights Act of 1993. This law was very important. It has a Section 7. There's a lot of sections, but we're going to talk about 2 today. In Section 7 of that law, anyone who goes into any government office of any kind is required to be offered a registration form for voting. Now, that's a great thing because it opens up registration even more so to anybody who wants it. We want it to be as easy as possible for people who want to be part of this process to be involved. And so this way we have these things offered at places like the welfare office, unemployment office, social security office, DMV, which is why this is called affectionately the motor voter law. You may have heard it referred to that way. And the problem is it's an unfunded mandate, which means that the people who work in these offices are not trained as to what that means and how to go about it. They don't know what they can and cannot say and do. They don't know. All they know is it's part of their job to offer this form. And so some people may feel that they're required to fill it out in order to do the business they came there to do, even if they don't wish to. It's possible that people will say, well, gee, thanks, but I'm already registered, and a well-intentioned clerk could say, we'll do it again just in case. Now that would make sense to an uninformed individual, thinking certainly that the duplicates will get caught. Unfortunately, we don't have a process to be able to catch the duplicates all the time. And therefore, this law has several unintended consequences. Section 7 also required all states to take mail-in registration. Now, if you've ever registered a voter, you know that you can't ask any questions. You can just say, here, fill it out, and whatever. And the questionnaire itself asks questions. Are you legally allowed to vote, and do you meet all the qualifications? But there is that eyeball-to-eyeball accountability that makes it a little harder to just brazenly turn something in when you know you're not legitimately allowed to make that registration. Now you get to take it home. Well, that's a really great idea too. I mean, really, it's a protection. If you've moved, if you have some reason need to re-register, and you've got a busy life, and you've just come out of the grocery store, and there they are, at the table, register to vote. Great, perfect opportunity. But you got ice cream in your bag. It's going to melt if you stand there and fill it out. Now you get to take it home, fill it out at your leisure, mail it in. It's a great protection to make sure no one loses the opportunity to register to vote. But you can imagine there might be some unintended consequences with that as well. Because of that, we now have bloated voter rolls. We have a lot of people on the voter rolls who never wanted to be there, have no intention of ever voting, and you can just sort of let your mind wander as to why that's a complicated problem. We also have low turnout statistics in some areas. This is kind of a dual problem. Low statistics, which makes all of us feel really horrible about our democracy. I mean, nobody cares anymore. Only 37% of the people turned out. But that's not true. If you took the percentage of the people who registered willingly and who intended to show up in the first place, you've got a really good turnout. But it's watered down by the people who were on those rolls and never really wanted to be there to start with. But then you also have in other places where you have voter turnout that's more than 100% of the registered voters in the county. I know you've heard those stories as well, and it happens all over the place. We have an explosion of phantom voters, people who don't really exist, okay? And a system that just is overworked and doesn't have what it takes to clear all that up. Now, Section 8 of this law is another problem. The great thing is that they require the states to maintain their voter rolls. This is now an obligation of the state. You have to go through and look for duplicates. You have to go through and clean the rolls of people who've deceased, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, people's names now have to stay on that list for 8 years. That didn't used to be that way in California. If you didn't vote in a presidential election, your name was gone. And if you wanted to vote, become a voter, you'd re-register. And that was a really good way to make sure that the riffraff and the people who had moved and all of that was off the rolls. But now we can't do that anymore. So the states that were not maintaining their rolls, now they're required to do that. Okay? However, we are currently working under a Department of Justice that has openly and brazenly said we will not enforce Section 8. We absolutely refuse to enforce Section 8. According to J. Christian Adams, there's no other way to interpret that except that it's deliberate and corrupt. But they also went one step farther and said to the states, we prefer that you not clean up your voter rolls. Okay, so when we have officials now who are deciding which laws to uphold and which laws not to uphold, that leaves it more to the citizens to try to do the job that we no longer have that federal protection to do. Christian also says that we have a widespread, organized, and systemic corruption of the voting process, and it can swing the election. So all of you out there who are planning to do just what Stephanie said and just what Dara said, and get out there and work for candidates and the propositions you agree with, and you're going to get out there and make those phone calls and walk those neighborhoods, and if you don't have an election process you can trust, it's all for naught. Which is why first you have to get involved with Election Integrity Project. First, or all the other work that you do may not make a difference at all. Okay, I'll go through that one. You can read that if you're a fast reader. Okay, there's the unintended consequences then of Section 8 of that, besides the Department of Justice, is that it limits our cleaning out of the deadwood of the voter rolls because non-voters have to be kept on for a full 8 years. Then we have the Help America Vote Act, HAVA, in 2002. Another couple of really great things that HAVA required. First of all, that states have to maintain a centralized list of voters. Pretty amazing to me that that isn't the case, or it never has been the case. You just have county by county by county, but we don't have a centralized state list. How do you check for duplicates? How do you know somebody's not voting in 2 counties? How do you know that? Because we don't have a single list. Well, this passed in 2002. We're just around the corner from 2012, 10 years, people. 10 years, California is still not in compliance with that law. So it is still difficult for the Secretary of State of California to do that job because we don't have a centralized list. We've gotten extensions and we've gotten waivers, which the Department of Justice is happy to give us. But the bottom line is, in a computer age, we're allowed to take less than a month to do that. It's taken 10 years, we still don't have it. This law also required provisional ballots. Great protection for you. Great protection for you. If you show up and because of a computer glitch or some clerical error, your name is off that list, they would have to turn you away and say, sorry, you're not a registered voter and you can't vote. Now they can't do that. Now you get to fill out a provisional ballot, and that's a great thing because now you're not disenfranchised. Unfortunately, the unintended consequences of that, as I said, the non-compliance, at least in California, but also we have a high potential of illegitimate votes counted. In this last election, well, the last two major elections, we've had a huge spike in the number of provisional ballots requested. Way out of any possible conceivable number of errors that could be made. Okay, now let that soak in. And because we always err on the side of counting the ballots so we don't disenfranchise anybody, and because of the speed with which you and I require that we find out who won, the pressure on the vote counters, the pressure on the registrar of voters is enormous to get the count. As a result, all of these provisional ballots, which have increased in number exponentially, have to be counted. They're supposed to research them, they're supposed to compare signatures, all that kind of stuff, and they just don't have the time to do it adequately and still have a legitimate report time to get you the winners of your election. Therefore, in this last election, 85% of the provisional ballots were counted. I don't think there could be that many errors. So you can see it adds up. So when you're disenfranchised because ballots are counted improperly, or ballots that shouldn't have been cast are counted at all, then you're disenfranchised. You are disenfranchised, and your civil rights are violated. This is why you should care.